Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us for another installment in our biweekly webinar series in honor of October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We've put together a two-part series here on cybersecurity horror stories. We'll go through and talk about some real-world examples and actually bring on some folks that will talk about their experiences with some of these cyber incidents. Before we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping items here. We are recording this webinar. We would be posting it to our website within about 24 hours after the webinar concludes. That way you can share it with colleagues, coworkers, anyone else who may be interested in the content. We'll be doing Q&A via the chat. I will not be monitoring the chat during the webinar presentation, but afterwards I'll certainly review the chat, look through for questions, and then do my best to answer those. Please bear with me. This is a live demo. I'll be bouncing around a little bit between PowerPoint, some recorded snippets with some business owners and other clients. So bear with me. There might be a kludgy moment or two, but we'll certainly get through it together. So with that, I certainly appreciate you joining, and let's go ahead and dive into and talk about our agenda and what we're going over today. So our agenda, we're going to go over two very specific types of cyber incident. We're going to go through and talk about BEC, or business email compromise. We'll go through define it a bit, talk about why it's important, provide some examples from the news and some things that have happened in somewhat recently with various compromises and how they've affected businesses. And then ASK has partnered with the Michigan Business Network for years, and we provide, we are the host of Bottom Line IT podcast. Mike Maddox, the president and CEO of ASK, is the host. And in honor of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, he has interviewed a number of folks who have had cyber incidents that will share their experiences. So we'll be pulling a few clips from some of those interviews. We'll hear from David Posey of Fiber Converters down in Constantine, Michigan. And then we'll also hear from Mike McClure of Robert Cinto America. They're based in Grand Ledge, Michigan. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and dive into business email compromise. We'll talk about what it is, why should you care. But first off, let's talk about today's environments. What the world we're living in today. And I used this graphic in a previous presentation, but I find it's very powerful. And then our data is everywhere. We've got things stored on our local machines, on our servers, in the cloud, and various applications, the Microsoft 365 suite, whether that be OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. You may have things in a private cloud somewhere tied to your CRMs or your line of business applications. So you've got data all over the place. And often one of those commonalities for accessing that data is email. If it's the Microsoft 365 suite, the credentials you use to log into your email, the same credentials you use to log into your SharePoint or your OneDrive. So if those credentials get compromised, not only did your email become compromised, but your access to company information can be compromised. And why that is so important is there are various types of data that can be compromised. And let's be honest here. Not only do we have, the intellectual property and the operational data about your employer and the company that you work for, we also have data about your company's customers. Probably a fair bit of information about the various customers. How you build them. ACH information, things of that nature. But also, and equally as important, and certainly don't forget about this, there's a lot of data about you stored by your company. Very few people outside of probably your spouse or other very close relatives have more information about you than your employer. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's second nature. Your employer needs a lot of information on you to make sure your taxes get paid, that your benefits are in order, that your paycheck goes to the right place. All your retirement and healthcare information, spouse and dependent information. There's all kinds of information your employer has about you. Well, and if your data is accessed, is compromised, not only is it information about your company, its customers, but also about you. So this is a very key thing that I'd like to try to get. I really try to get into people's heads is, yes, you need to protect your employer. It's the hand that feeds you, but at the same time, in protecting your employer, you're also protecting yourself. So with that, certainly just awareness is the first and most important step. But we'll dive into business email compromise. So what is a business email compromise? I'm not going to read this, but basically it's somebody who gets access to your email. One of the biggest things, the scariest things about this is often they'll sit in your email for quite some time and start to learn things. And you'll hear this from David Posey here in a few about how long these bad actors or these cyber criminals will just hang out and monitor and watch things and look for opportunities. Some examples that I'd like to bring to the table. There was a compromise of a federal agency, and federal agencies, you think they're behind very strict firewall and very strict rules, a lot of access controls and things of that nature. And I'm not going to go through and read this article to you here, but one of the key takeaways is here's a description of the attack. But here the cyber threat actor had valid access credentials for multiple users' Office 365 accounts and domain administrator accounts, which they leveraged to initiate access to the agency's network. So this could have been through a phishing campaign. This could have been a number of different ways that they gained access to these credentials. But once they had credentials, they were in. And then they were able to lurk and explore and discover and find ways into various agency storage and document repositories and exfiltrate a substantial amount of sensitive information. So again, I'm not going to read this to you, but again, this is a federal agency. Here we're at a .gov website. This happens to places that pardon me, probably have far better security than you do at your business. So this is something to very much be aware of. One other incident that came up through a business email compromise was Milwaukee Bucks. Their tax data was stolen for their players and their employees. And again, it was all started with an email that came in impersonating the team president asking for the 2015 tax year data on the franchise's employees. And so that employee, thinking that it came from the team president, certainly provided up that information. And so now the criminals have W-2, name, address, social security number, compensation details, date of birth for not only the employees of the Bucks, but the players of the Bucks. I mean, you've got, these guys are millionaires here, at least some of them are. And, that sensitive information with somebody with that kind of earning potential, is a very, very valuable thing. I think, we can all put two and two together and say, well, if I've got name, address, social security number, and all this defining information about somebody who makes 8 digits, I can probably do some pretty nefarious things and apply for some pretty hefty credit limits based on that information. So, this is something that, and again, this Bucks incident happened back in 2016. So now this federal agency compromise was very, very recent. But at the same time, the Bucks, this has been going on for years, folks. This has been going on for years, and it's something that we just need to be aware of and be careful of. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take us now over to the Bottom Line IT segment on the Michigan Business Network. And we'll hear from David Posey at Fiber Converters about his experience, what happened to his company, and what they were able to do about it. So with that, I'll just let you all listen in.
That's awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about what happened. So you're operating as usual, and doing what we all do, which is striving to manage our operations, meet our customers' needs, and create outstanding product. And you were hit with a curveball. So why don't you tell the listeners what happened?
We were. So I will tell you the point that I actually picked up the curveball, and then I'll back up and tell you when it got pitched. we picked it up. We have one of our primary vendors. We buy quite a bit of paper, and one of our largest vendors called us and had mentioned that they noticed our payment patterns had changed. And we always take discounts. That's typically what we do when we can. And they noticed, hey, you're past your discount time. You're not overdue yet, but just noticed your payment patterns have changed. Is anything going on that we should know about? And my controller says, no, we've been paying you all along. I'm looking at the records. We wrote several checks and you should have received them. And there was some confusion, and we started digging into it and found that indeed we had been making payments, but it was not going to the vendor that we thought it was going to.
Oh.
And so a lot of our effort from that point forward started trying to unravel, where did this start? And based on some information that we were able to glean from ASK, who did some forensic work for us and dug back into our history in Office 365, we had a single employee who, out of the goodness of their heart, to make the vendor who she thought was the vendor happy, got a request to change some banking information because they were
request via email.
Yes,
this by email.
Via email. Yep. Request that said, hey, we're in the middle of an audit. We need to have our ACH information updated. Here's our new routing and account numbers. Would you take care of this for us? Now, typically what we would ask is that employee makes verbal contact with someone, a known contact at the vendor, and verify that that's real. But since they were our biggest vendor, they wanted to be extra happy, make them extra happy, and do it relatively quick. So they went in and changed it. Now, what ended up happening is she had clicked on a link inside of an email that we're not quite sure exactly what it was asking for, but it certainly ended up harvesting her credentials. So probably opened up a document. She had to log in to do something, stripped out her credentials, and then they went in the background and set up a pretty interesting rule on her inbox and basically started mirroring everything that she received. So they sat in the background for a few weeks, looked at all the emails that came in to her inbox, really went through and picked the top vendor that they could see who was doing most of the transactions, duplicated their letterhead, contact info, looked like it came from the same person, and then created that false request and sent it in. And that was only one of 4. So we actually ended up changing 4 vendors before we found out exactly what was happening.
Yeah, this is a classic business email compromise. You see this all the time. Get access to the mailbox, mirror the mailbox so that everything that comes into the inbox shows up in Outlook for that user, but also shows up for the bad actor. And then they sit there and lurk and wait and study and learn about your organization, learn about your operations, find the best and most effective way to monetize their access. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the second segment here, where David finishes the description and talks about some of the things that he's done and what the impact of the business was, and then again how he was able to confidently feel like he's remediated this, and at least he and his staff are less susceptible to this moving forward. So we'll pick up with the second segment here now.
Now you took us up to the point where an employee had clicked on a link and the bad guys were sitting in the background for quite some time, which is what they do. And they were watching her email transactions and they were looking for how they want to attack. And they were able to identify your largest vendor and ask for a change in banking credentials. They did this for other vendors too, you said.
Yes.
So when did you first become aware? Take us into fiber converters when this started to come to light, and this had to be a moment of panic. I mean, this had to be like, oh my gosh.
Absolutely. And it started as we think we might have a problem conversation. And then we started putting together some of the numbers, and it was more than a problem. I mean, it was a substantial amount of money that we had sent to some bad actors. And so internally, it was more of absolutely a panic moment for sure. And then it was, where else have we done this? So now it's, you can't trust anything that's happened in the last 5 or 6 months, because that's kind of the timeline of these transactions. And you had to go back and revalidate anybody that made any banking information changes. A few of those were real, and then a few more that we found in that audit internally that were again, fraudulent. So we did some work on that side, and then we tried our very best to shore up our internal protocols, and that really is kind of where we ended up, talking to ASK, and can you help us figure out, one, what happened, and two, what we can do to mitigate it in the future. And we learned a few things.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier. These bad actors, these criminals are very good because, when you first hear stories like this, people think, well, what, nobody would fall for that. Or I wouldn't, like you even said, well, normal process is you call and you verify by phone. The thing about this is, I've seen this time and time again, they're so good at mirroring the language used by other people because they're watching the email transactions for quite some time. Sometimes they'll even cut and paste the same phrasing and the same phraseology, if that's a word, into the email. So you really get sucked into this, and and it's so easy to do, and it's the best and brightest of us will be victims of this, and then, like you said, it can be devastating, not only financially, but then you got to go back and look through records to see if there's more of it. And the thing about cybersecurity is, we all have antivirus, we all have firewalls, we all have email protection in place. They're necessary, but not sufficient to catch everything. The human action is still the weakest link, and that's what they prey on. Yeah. And without proactive steps, you can't prevent this stuff. So, we, following the forensics that we did at Fiber, you opted to put in what we call detect and respond, which is a tool that allows for proactively monitoring everyone's computer to look for any infiltration, any bad actors, any ransomware, any malware, even email, rules, and catch it before it becomes catastrophic. And that's the takeaway, I think, for businesses today.
I absolutely agree. It's a good tool. And one very simple thing that we did, and maybe some people listening to this would also find it, that they resisted the two-factor authentication because it's kind of a pain, it's a hassle. But basically, hey, when you log into Office 365 or whatever maybe you might be using, you're prompted for a code to enter to validate that you are on site and making the login. And honestly, that would have stopped us because we would have had a remote login attempt, and that would have popped up on that person's phone or computer to verify, and they would have said, I'm not logging in, and that would have been the end of it.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I hear that a lot from businesses that, hey, our people won't accept two-factor authentication, which, as you correctly stated, is you log into your email, you have to have another method to verify you are who you say you are. But it's today with technology as simple as hitting yes on your phone. I mean, it pops up and goes, is this really you? And you go, yep. And you hit it and you're in. And that would have stopped us.
Yeah. So yeah, it absolutely would have stopped it cold, and that would have been the end of that conversation. And we've paid a lot for that education now.
So folks, I hope that brings some reality to the business email compromise. I mean, it can happen to anyone, and the very tail end of that segment, the most important thing you can possibly do is enable that multi-factor, that two-factor authentication for your Office 365 or wherever your email happens to sit. Yes, it's a pain to have to hit the approve button or to type in that 6-digit code, but the pain that you go through for that is a tiny fraction of the pain that you can go through if you don't implement that two-factor authentication. So if there's any takeaway you can have regarding the business email compromise, the thing that knocks out like 98% of business email compromises is that multi-factor authentication. If you do not have it enabled, enable it. Find ways to get it enabled. Don't take pushback from the old school employees that think it's a pain and don't want to have to. There are plenty of ways to have that second factor authenticate. I mean, I know with Office 365, if you have some old school people, they can get a phone call from Microsoft where they press a button on their phone to authenticate. So there are lots and lots of different ways to do it. Now, personally, I think that the Authenticator app is by far the most convenient, certainly for me. But there are many ways you can do it, and you can do, have different employees, doing the two-factor in different ways based on them, their experience, what they're comfortable with. So, so again, the big takeaway for that is the multi-factor authentication, and then the detect and respond solution that Mike brought up. We'll go into just a little bit later after the crypto wall and ransomware discussion. I have a little blurb on our detect and respond solution that I'll show as well. So with that, let's move on to crypto wall and ransomware. I think most of us have heard about these from time to time, or in the news, especially recently. Ransomware is something that's becoming more and more commonplace, where somebody clicks on a link, all of a sudden this file downloads, and the computer basically locks up because the CPU's maxed out because this file was nefarious, and now it's running an encryption program that's encrypting every piece of data on that computer, which is terrible in and of itself. But one of the worst things about ransomware is written and programmed to spread laterally. So one of the first things it does is it starts the encryption process on the files on the machine, but then it's looking for, what is this machine connected to? What else can I get at? Is this connected to a network? Oh, wonderful, it's connected to a network. What network shares are available? Oh, let's go encrypt those too. What other access does this machine and this user have? Let's go and encrypt that data as well. And pretty quickly, it can spread across an entire organization, and really your only hope at that point is restoring from backups, because all of your data is encrypted, not only on the machine, but elsewhere on the servers and cloud applications and things like that, because they're all interconnected. Back to that data slide, all that data is interconnected. And then you're looking at, seeing this ransom note pop up on your computer in a text file that in, sometimes good, sometimes bad English requests an amount of Bitcoin be purchased and wired to an account that has an account number that's in hexadecimal. That's probably housed overseas somewhere where US prosecution doesn't work. So let's talk about a couple of real world examples here that have come up very recently. There's the Universal Health Service ransomware attack. This is something that's as recent as just a couple of days ago. This was on the 28th of September. This is a 400 location medical service. They have hospitals, doctors' offices. And without reading this to you again, the big thing here is, it spread laterally. They got to the point where they were charting all of their patients via paper. They were having very significant issues dispensing medication because all of their prescription and medication services were all digital. They didn't have any paper anymore. They got to the point of moving patients to different hospitals and not accepting new patients at their ER because they couldn't service them. And this is a key one here, where this is a very good example where these guys struck late in the evening on a Friday, because they love to do that, because the security guys, the IT guys in general, are off for the weekend. So now it's got 2 full days of running rampant within the network, unless there's some alert that triggers, to really do a lot of, you give a bad actor 48 hours of access when their goal is to encrypt your software or all of your data. That's plenty of time for them to access every piece of information that they can through your network and encrypt it. And then again, drop that ransom note asking for a sum of money in Bitcoin to be wired to that hexadecimal Bitcoin wallet somewhere overseas. So again, this is happening real time. Another one is a technology company. And these guys, technology companies, are targets because the bad actors and the cyber criminals know that technology companies have access to a lot of different companies' information. So if you can compromise a technology company, now all of a sudden you may be able to compromise every one of the people that they work with. And this is a good sized technology company. They work with large businesses and government, and they got hit, and they're out letting their clients know that, hey, you need to reset passwords that we use to remotely access, because there could be a security concern to you, Mr. Customer of ours. So this is a terrible one that, to my knowledge, I think they've got it pretty well cleaned up at this point, but this was a few days of trying to get this remediated. They discovered the attack on the 23rd, and it was September 23rd, and it was still ongoing as of the 28th. So they were still working on remediation, days later. So again, these are two real-world examples of real companies that have recently been hit with ransomware and the terrible negative effects that they've had on their ability to do business and their ability to service their customers. So with that, let's dive into our second bottom line IT snippet. This is a snippet with Mike interviewing Mike McClure from Robert Cinto America, and they had a number of ransomware incidents, and Mike will kind of take us through the timelines and their experiences and what they've done. So with that, we'll go ahead and play this one. So just listen.
There were some incidents earlier, and then kind of a major incident. So tell our listeners about that.
Yeah. Actually, when I was preparing for this conversation, I had to pull up our timeline of security incidents, and we can go back to 2015 when we had our first crypto wall attack. And it was fun. We're a small department. It was funny because leading up to that event, I remember conversations with, my colleagues. We were in the room together, and it was like, if I see it, I'm jumping out that window first. You're not gonna see me again. Because
unfortunately, this is a all too common conversation, especially around small IT departments, especially with those guys that don't have the training, nor do they have the time to skill up in the security. When these incidents happen, unless they've recently had some really high-end cybersecurity training, it really is they don't know what to do. And Mike's not wrong when some of them look at each other and say, okay, I'm going to go out that window, you're going to go out that window, we're going to bail because we don't know how to deal with this. So this is something that unfortunately can be all too common within small on-site local IT. Because they have enough to deal with. They're dealing with patching and user issues and password resets and making sure people have access to the right things. They are not cybersecurity professionals. And when an incident like this happens, they're asked to put on a hat that is rarely worn by them.
Because leading up to that, I mean, you'd heard about it in IT circles about these crypto wall events where the attack comes through an email or a drive-by website, advertisement, and it's like, boom, you have no idea. The next thing you know, someone's calling and can't get to their files, and then you find that everything on your network's encrypted, and you owe someone money in some country you've never heard of, using Bitcoin. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And, it had happened. I mean, we got the call from, that's exactly how it happened. Hey, I can't open this file. And, we traced it back to a computer. Actually, it took a while to trace the source computer where it came from. But when we found out and, did the analysis, it actually came from an advertisement on a very safe, what you would consider, any normal person would consider a safe website. It was their homepage, actually. And so that was the first incident. We actually got hit again with a crypto wall in 2016, and then actually twice in 2016, a crypto wall. This time they were both from an email that was a spoof attempt, and a third time was too many for crypto wall. So we got into KnowBe4, which is like a user awareness solution.
Yeah, training.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last straw in late 2017 was the Emote Attack, and what had happened there was actually through an RDP vulnerability, and it got in our system, and it spread through computers, and honestly, we had no idea how many computers it was on, and it was a very, very bad situation. We knew, all these computers just lighten up. Like our antivirus would just tell us that something was on this computer, and then the next computer it would just alert us, but it wasn't stopping anything. It was just
right.
saying, hey, there's an active process.
And they were getting
Um,
locked down and encrypted and
yeah,
inaccessible.
and it was
It's
spreading.
it's amazing how fast it spreads. And
Yeah.
you mentioned RDP. If listeners are not familiar, basically what you're saying is there was a hole in the network, which through a remote desktop protocol. Which, by the way, if you are listening and you're not in technology, you're not an IT person, that's not uncommon. I mean, this stuff happens all the time. I mean, you can't completely lock down a network. It's impossible if you want to be productive. So they crop up, and the bad guys
Yep.
know where to look.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It was used for remote access, and they got in, and we had no idea. We literally put signs on doors, sent emails out, and said, if you've been on the network since this date when it started, which was like 3 days prior, we need to see your computer. And we would take it off the network. We would run, the right tools to remove it, and then the bad part is that computer could have been reinfected if we didn't stop the spread. And we were like, we've got to do something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, they went through an absolutely horrible time with a number of different, ransomware crypto wall events. Talking about, literally having to put signs on doors and send people out, send out a notification. If you've been on the network since this date, we've got to have your computer. It's infected, and you could reinfect everybody unless we get through and clean this computer. So again, this is something I feel terribly for Mike on this one, because it's unfortunately all too common. So with that, let's go ahead and go to the second segment here, and we'll wrap up and hear a little bit more about Mike's experience, and then what Robert Cinto did to make themselves more comfortable and to be able to eliminate, or at least greatly reduce, the threat of ransomware taking down the organization.
Spreading. How do we know how widespread it is? Bring us from there up to the point in time when you kind of the dust settled. You finally got business back in order, and I'm imagining the impact of the business was significant, right? I mean, things were shut down for some time.
Oh, absolutely. We had to, pretty much take everyone's computer from them, take it off the network, clean it up before we could give it back to them. And, like I said, it was a lot of our time to make it known, the, tons of downtime for the users, not to mention the unknowns with what happened to the intruders. What do they do to our systems? I mean, that's scary in itself. We just knew we needed some a new solution to what we were doing. We weren't doing enough. We had spoofing rules that needed set up. We needed better protection, in the form of boots on the ground with our team here. We needed more eyes on our network, and that's what led us to ASK and the monitoring that we have from them.
Yeah, and the solution you very wisely chose is called live security monitoring, which is exactly that. It's 24-hour a day, every day, monitoring and management to make sure that if this stuff gets in, it's stopped immediately. So it's through what they call a SOC, a Security Operations Center, and SIM technology. And folks may not be familiar with that, but the SIM is like, it's the high-powered supercomputer center that looks at traffic patterns, looks at what's coming in and out of the network, makes some analysis using business intelligence, and can identify potential threats very effectively. But then the SOC are the people who take that data and actually look at it and go, no, that's not threatening, or that's normal, or they're doing new business in that area or whatever, but this looks concerning. Dive into it and somehow do it in kind of real time, so that if there is an Emote Attack that comes in again, they can stop it within minutes, and that has a huge advantage, right?
Oh, definitely. When you were talking, I'm reminded of incidents where we'll be notified by the ASK team, hey, there's a computer on this network that something's going on, and they've even been able to stop that traffic right in its tracks to allow us to get on that computer, get the computer from the person, whatever we need to do. And yeah, it's the reality is we're such a small IT team here that we don't have, someone on staff to look at these types of events in real time. We don't have someone that just monitors this traffic all the time.
Sure.
So we're alerted when there's a computer that's made communication with, a known bad, if you will, website or location on the internet. A server that's known to be hosting malware. We've even been alerted when someone visited a site that was, a phishing site. So and then we contacted the person and they said, yeah, I put in my username and password. I thought I was getting into, my quarantined email.
Right.
And so, we changed their password. Like we're able to get ahead of it with this monitoring service.
That's being proactive, and that's
the big takeaway here is that is a very proactive approach. I mean, obviously what Robert Cento went through was terrible. They had a number of different incidents that happened, and you heard Mike McClure talk about the early on incidents and how they were devastating. They took days of remediation, touching every computer. IT guys probably not sleeping a whole lot during that time. And then recently where somebody clicked on something bad or went to the wrong website where things just got locked down for that one user. An alert was generated to Mike and his team, and they were able to go out and remediate that one issue before it spread, before it got rolling, before it got started. It's a lot easier to clean up one computer or change one user's email or credentials or logins or credentials rather than it's been spreading for 2 days and now 80% of your staff are infected. Now you have to go and deal with 80% of your machines and resetting passwords and credentials for 80% of your users. That's a much taller challenge for your IT staff, especially if as most of you have a relatively small IT staff. It's not like you've got dozens of people in your IT department. So there's those economies of scale that you can get with a live monitoring solution. So with that, I'd like to, I found this and I really want to kind of go through this because this, I thought, provided a very, very, very good picture of all of the things that these bad actors are doing once they get in. They find a way to get in, and then they're looking at, what commands can I run? What information can I gather? What privileges does this user that I've compromised have? They're trying to create an account for themselves or manipulate the account so they can get back in whenever they want. Again, they're hunting for network devices and things like that, servers, storage, access to information, what other credentials can they uncover, and then they defer, modify or disable the tools that are in place to defend the environment. So, those static tools that aren't being monitored, they can get in and make edits to them so that their tracks are covered. And then they're looking for all the data they can possibly collect and any command and control that they can compromise to spread. So this is a very good picture of all the various things that these guys are looking to do. And it happens very, very quickly, and nobody's really a target anymore. They're looking for people they can get access to. And going back to business email compromise and that two-factor or multi-factor authentication, most cyber criminals are not going to sit there and spend days and days and days trying to compromise one person's credentials. So if they log in with username and password and then a two-factor authentication pops up, they just move on to the next one because it's not worth trying to compromise that two-factor. There are enough people out there that don't have the multi-factor authentication that are much easier targets. So, and then on the ransomware front, certainly the live security monitoring is an excellent tool because not only does it cover the ransomware and the crypto wall type of scenarios, but again, it also alerts on visits to phishing sites. It monitors all of the traffic in and out of the network, looking at everything going in and out, where these computers are going. Is this common for this network to contact servers in this geography? There are really a lot of various things that they're looking for. But in the first segment of Bottom Line IT, Mike Maddox mentioned that folks at Fiber Converters had installed the detect and respond solution, which is specifically to target and defend against ransomware and malware. And this next slide is actually a quick video. It really does a great job of highlighting detect and respond and how it works. So we're going to go ahead and conclude with this, and we'll have a couple more minutes to chat, and then they can let you get back to your day. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the detect and respond video.
It's easy to ignore a threat you can't see. And while you might think you're not big enough to be targeted by cyber attacks, security engineers like us see it happen to companies like yours all the time. All it takes is a single innocent click, and boom. Ransomware infiltrates your device, locks you out of your files, shuts down productivity, and effectively cuts off your revenue stream within seconds. Now you get to go to the dark web to purchase Bitcoin, and that's not the end of it. Their tactics are simple. They strike often, and companies who fall for it can end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars digging themselves out of the mess. We don't want you to be another victim, and that's why we developed our Detect and Respond cybersecurity protection. Detect and Respond recognizes the actions and characteristics of malware or ransomware and stops it from running immediately. So instead of your CPU maxing out as your files become encrypted, something much more boring happens. Nothing, which is exactly what we want. Instead, a notification pops up on our screen and we instantly take action. And since we installed on the individual device, that device is protected wherever it goes, regardless of the network it connects to. Let us protect your company with one of the best and surprisingly affordable cybersecurity solutions on the market. Give us a call to get started with Detect and Respond or any of our other cybersecurity protections today. It's easy.
So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everybody for attending. Certainly, I would hope that you could join us here in 2 weeks. We'll be continuing Cybersecurity Awareness Month with a part 2 of our cybersecurity horror stories. My goal is to bring in our manager of our Enhanced Security Services division and ask him to talk to us a bit more about some real life experiences that he's had, share some of his stories, and some of the things that he and his team see on a day in and day out basis. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. Certainly, please. Feel free to reach out either via phone or email. I'd be happy to have conversations with you about any of the things that we've talked about today. And let's see, let's go ahead and get to the chat, see if I've got any questions from folks here. It looks like either I didn't spark any questions or I didn't spark any questions that people decided to post in chat anyway. So certainly, reach out to ASK or myself if you have any questions or would like to run a scenario by, get an idea of what you should be doing based on, what specifically you're trying to protect, or if you're just getting into the initial phases of looking at your cybersecurity risk posture. We'd be happy to, help provide some clarity there as to, where you're at and what you should be doing. So with that, I thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again here in 2 weeks.